Section 2 of A Dream of John Ball by William Morris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6. The Battle at the Township's End. Our men had got into their places leisurely and coolly enough, and with no lack of jesting and laughter. As we went along the hedge by the road, the leaders tore off leafy twigs from the low oak bushes therein, and set them for a rallying sign in their hats and headpieces, and 2 or 3 of them had horns for blowing. Will Green, when he got into his place, which was 30 yards from where Jack Straw and the billman stood in the corner of the 2 hedges, the road hedge and the hedge between the close and field, looked to right and left of him a moment, then turned to the man on the left and said, "Look you, mate, when you hear our horns blow, ask no more questions, but shoot straight and strong at whatso cometh towards us, till ye hear more tidings from Jack Straw or from me. Pass that word onward." Then he looked at me and said, "Now, lad from Essex, thou hadst best sit down out of the way at once. Forsooth, I wot not why I brought thee hither. Wilt thou not back to the cross? For thou art little of a fighting man?" "Nay," said I would see the play. What shall come of it?" "Little," said he. "We shall slay a horse or twain, maybe. I will tell thee, since thou hast not seen a fight belike, as I have seen some, that these men-at-arms cannot run fast either to the play or from it, if they be afoot. And if they come on a horseback, what shall hinder me to put a shaft into the poor beast? But down with thee on the daisies, for some shot there will be first." As he spoke he was pulling off his belts and other gear, and his coat, which done he laid his quiver on the ground, girt him again, did his axe and buckler onto his girdle, and hung up his other attire on the nearest tree behind us. Then he opened his quiver, and took out of it some 2 dozen of arrows, which he stuck in the ground beside him, ready to his hand. Most of the bowmen within sight were doing the like. As I glanced toward the houses, I saw 3 or 4 bright figures moving through the orchards, and presently noted that they were women, all clad more or less like the girl in the rose, except that 2 of them wore white coifs on their heads. Their errand there was clear, for each carried a bundle of arrows under her arm. One of them came straight up to Will Green, and I could see at once that she was his daughter. She was tall and strongly made, with black hair like her father, somewhat comely, though no great beauty, but as they met, her eyes smiled even more than her mouth, and made her face look very sweet and kind, and the smile was answered back in a way so quaintly like to her father's face, that I too smiled for goodwill and pleasure. "Well, well, lass," said he, "dost thou think that here is Cressy Field toward, that ye bring all this artillery? Turn back, my girl, and set the pot on the fire, for that shall we need when we come home, I and this ballad maker here." "Nay," she said, nodding kindly at me, "if this is to be no Cressy, then may I stop to see, as well as the ballad maker, since he hath neither sword nor staff." "Sweetling," he said, "get thee home in haste. This play is but little, yet mightest thou be hurt in it. And trust me, the time may come, sweetheart, when even thou and such as thou shalt hold a sword or a staff. Ere the moon throws a shadow, we shall be back." She turned away lingering, not without tears on her face, laid the sheaf of arrows at the foot of the tree, and hastened off through the orchard. I was going to say something, when Will Green held up his hand as who would bid us hearken. The noise of the horse hoofs, after growing nearer and nearer, had ceased suddenly, and a confused murmur of voices had taken the place of it. "Get thee down and take cover, old lad," said Will Green. "The dance will soon begin, and ye shall hear the music presently." Sure enough, as I slipped down by the hedge close to which I had been standing, I heard the harsh twang of the bowstrings, 1, 2, 3, almost together, from the road, and even the woo of the shafts, though that was drowned in a moment by a confused but loud and threatening shout from the other side, and again the bowstrings clanged, and this time a far-off clash of arms followed, and therewithal that cry of a strong man that comes without his will, and is so different from his wonted voice, that one has a guess thereby of the change that death is. Then for a while was almost silence, nor did our horns blow up, though some half-dozen of the billmen had leapt into the road when the bows first shot. But presently came a great blare of trumpets and horns from the other side, and therewith, as it were, a river of steel and bright coats poured into the field before us, and still their horns blew as they spread out toward the left of our line. The cattle in the pasture field, heretofore feeding quietly, seemed frightened silly by the sudden noise, and ran about, tail in air and lowing loudly. The old bull with his head a little lowered, and his stubborn legs planted firmly, growling threateningly, while the geese about the brook waddled away, gobbling and squeaking, all which seemed so strange to us along with the threat of sudden death that rang out from the bright array over against us, that we laughed outright, the most of us, and Will Green put down his head in mockery of the bull, and grunted like him, whereat we laughed yet more. He turned round to me as he knocked his arrow, and said, I would they were just 50 paces nigher, and they move not. Ho, Jack Straw, shall we shoot? For the latter named was nigh us now. He shook his head and said nothing as he stood looking at the enemy's line. Fear not, but they are the right folk, Jack, quoth Will Green. Yea, yea, said he, but abide a while. They could make naught of the highway, and 2 of their sergeants had a message from the grey goose feather. Abide, for they have not crossed the road to our right hand, and belike have not seen our fellows on the other side, who are now for a bushment to them. I looked hard at the man. He was a tall, wiry, and broad-shouldered fellow, clad in a handsome armour of bright steel, that certainly had not been made for a yeoman, but over it he had a common linen smock-frock or gabardine, like our field workmen wear now, or used to wear, and in his helmet he carried instead of a feather a wisp of wheaten straw. He bore a heavy axe in his hand, besides the sword he was girt with, and round his neck hung a great horn for blowing. I should say that I knew that there were at least 3 Jack Straws among the fellowship of the discontented, one of whom was over in Essex. As we waited there, every bowman with his shaft knocked on the string. There was a movement in the line opposite, and presently came from it a little knot of 3 men, the middle one on horseback, the other 2 armed with long-handled glaives, all 3 well muffled up in armour. As they came nearer, I could see that the horseman had a tabard over his armour, gaily embroidered, with a green tree on a gold ground, and in his hand a trumpet. They are come to summon us. Wilt thou that he speak, Jack? Said Will Green. Nay, said the other, yet shall he have warning first. Shoot when my horn blows. And therewith he came up to the hedge, climbed over, slowly because of his armour, and stood some dozen yards out in the field. The man on horseback put his trumpet to his mouth and blew a long blast, and then took a scroll into his hand and made as if he were going to read. But Jack Straw lifted up his voice and cried out, Do it not, or thou art but dead. We will have no accursed lawyers and their sheepskins here. Go back to those that sent thee. But the man broke in a loud harsh voice, Ho, ye people! What will ye, gathering in arms? Then cried Jack Straw, Sir fool, hold your peace till ye have heard me, or else we shoot at once. Go back to those that sent thee, and tell them that we free men of Kent are on the way to London to speak with King Richard, and to tell him that which he wots not, to wit, that there is a certain sort of fools and traitors to the realm, who would put collars on our necks and make beasts of us, and that it is his right and his devoir to do as he swore when he was crowned and anointed at Westminster on the stone of doom, and gainsay these thieves and traitors. And if he be too weak, then shall we help him, and if he will not be king, then shall we have one who will be, and that is the King's Son of Heaven. Now, therefore, if any withstand us on our lawful errand as we go to speak with our own King and Lord, let him look to it. Bear back this word to them that sent thee. But for thee, hearken, thou bastard of an inky sheepskin. Get thee gone, and tarry not. 3 times shall I lift up my hand, and the 3rd time look to thyself, for then shalt thou hear the loose of our bowstrings, and after that naught else till thou hearest the devil bidding thee welcome to hell. Our fellows shouted, but the summoner began again, yet in a quavering voice. Ho, ye people! What will ye, gathering in arms? Wot ye not that ye are doing or shall do great harm, loss, and hurt to the king's lieges? He stopped. Jack Straw's hand was lowered for the 2nd time. He looked to his men right and left, and then turned rein and turned tail, and scuttled back to the main body at his swiftest. Huge laughter rattled out all along our line as Jack Straw climbed back into the orchard, grinning also. Then we noted more movement in the enemy's line. They were spreading the archers and arbalestiers to our left, and the men-at-arms and others also spread somewhat, under the 3 pennons of which Long Gregory had told us, and which were plain enough to us in the clear evening. Presently the moving line faced us, and the archers set off at a smart pace toward us, the men-at-arms holding back a little behind them. I knew now that they had been within bowshot all along, but our men were loath to shoot before their first shots would tell, like those half-dozen in the road, when, as they told me afterwards, a plump of their men-at-arms had made a show of falling on. But now, as soon as those men began to move on us directly in face, Jack Straw put his horn to his lips and blew a loud rough blast that was echoed by 5 or 6 others along the orchard hedge. Every man had his shaft knocked on the string. I watched them, and Will Green specially. He and his bow and its string seemed all of a piece, so easily by seeming did he draw the nock of the arrow to his ear. A moment as he took his aim, and then, oh, then did I understand the meaning of the awe with which the ancient poet speaks of the loose of the god Apollo's bow, for terrible indeed was the mingled sound of the twanging bowstring and the whirring shaft so close to me. I was now on my knees right in front of Will, and saw all clearly. The arbalestiers, for no longbow men were over against our stead, had all of them bright headpieces, and stout body armor of boiled leather with metal studs, and as they came towards us, I could see over their shoulders great wooden shields hanging at their backs. Further to our left, their longbowmen had shot almost as soon as ours, and I heard or seemed to hear the rush of the arrows through the apple boughs, and a man's cry therewith. But with us the longbow had been before the crossbow. One of the arbalestiers fell outright, his great shield clattering down on him, and moved no more, while 3 others were hit and were crawling to the rear. The rest had shouldered their bows and were aiming, but I thought unsteadily, and before the triggers were drawn again, Will Green had knocked and loosed, and not a few others of our folk. Then came the wooden hail of the bolts rattling through the boughs, but all overhead, and no one hit. The next time Will Green knocked his arrow, he drew with a great shout, which all our fellows took up, for the arbalestiers, instead of turning about in their places, covered by their great shields, and winding up their crossbows for a second shot, as is the custom of such soldiers, ran huddling together toward their men-at-arms, our arrows driving thump-thump into their shields as they ran. I saw 4 lying on the field, dead or sore wounded, but our archers shouted again, and kept on each plucking the arrows from the ground, and knocking and loosing swiftly but deliberately at the line before them. Indeed, now was the time for these terrible bowmen, for as Will Green told me afterwards, they always reckoned to kill through cloth or leather at 500 yards, and they had let the crossbowmen come nearly within 300, and these were now all mingled and muddled up with the men-at-arms at scant 500 yards distance, and belike, too, the latter were not treating them too well, but seemed to be belabouring them with their spear-staves in their anger at the poorness of the play, so that, as Will Green said, it was like shooting at hayricks. All this, you must understand, lasted but a few minutes, and when our men had been shooting quite coolly, like good workmen at peaceful work, for a few minutes more, the enemy's line seemed to clear somewhat. The pennon with the 3 red kine showed in front, and 3 men armed from head to foot in gleaming steel, except for their short coats, bright with heraldry, were with it. One of them, and he bore the 3 kine on his coat, turned round and gave some word of command, and an angry shout went up from them, and they came on steadily towards us, the man with the red kine on his coat leading them, a great naked sword in his hand. You must note that they were all on foot, but as they drew nearer, I saw their horses led by grooms and pages coming on slowly behind them. Sooth said Will Green that the men-at-arms run not fast either to or fro the fray. They came on no faster than a hasty walk, their arms clashing about them, and the twang of the bows and whistle of the arrows never failing all the while, but going on like the push of the westerly gale, as from time to time the men-at-arms shouted, "Ha! Ha! Out! Out, Kentish thieves!" But when they began to fall on, Jack Straw shouted out, "Bills to the field! Bills to the field!" Then all our billmen ran up and leapt over the hedge into the meadow, and stood stoutly along the ditch under our bows, Jack Straw in the forefront, handling his great axe. Then he cast it into his left hand, caught up his horn and winded it loudly. The men-at-arms drew near steadily. Some fell under the arrow storm, but not a many. For though the target was big, it was hard, since not even the clothyard shaft could pierce well-wrought armour of plate, and there was much armour among them. Withal, the arbalestiers were shooting again, but high and at a venture, so they did us no hurt. But as these soldiers, made wise by the French war, were now drawing near, and our bowmen were casting down their bows and drawing their short swords, or handling their axes, as did Will Green, muttering, "Now must Hob Wright's gear end this play." While this was a-doing, lo, on a sudden flight of arrows from our right on the flank of the sergeant's array, which stayed them somewhat, not because it slew many men, but because they began to bethink them that their foes were many and all around them. Then the road hedge on the right seemed alive with armed men, for whatever could hold sword or staff amongst us was there. Every bowman also leapt our orchard hedge, sword or axe in hand, and with a great shout, billmen, archers, and all, ran in on them, half armed, yea, and half naked some of them, strong and stout, and lithe and light withal, the wrath of battle and the hope of better times lifting up their hearts till nothing could withstand them. So was all mingled together, and for a minute or two was a confused clamour over which rose a clatter like the riveting of iron plates, or the noise of the street of coppersmiths at Florence. Then the throng burst open, and the steel-clad sergeants and squires and knights ran huddling and shuffling towards their horses. But some cast down their weapons, and threw up their hands and cried for peace and ransom, and some stood and fought desperately, and slew some till they were hammered down by many strokes, and of these were the bailiffs and tipstaves, and the lawyers and their men, who could not run and hoped for no mercy. I looked on as a picture and wondered, and my mind was at strain to remember something forgotten, which yet had left its mark on it. I heard the noise of the horse hoofs of the fleeing men-at-arms. The archers and arbalestiers had scattered before the last minutes of the play. I heard the confused sound of laughter and rejoicing down in the meadow, and close by me the evening wind lifting the lighter twigs of the trees, and far away the many noises of the quiet country, till light and sound both began to fade from me, and I saw and heard nothing. I leapt up to my feet presently, and there was Will Green before me as I had first seen him in the street, with coat and hood, and the gear at his girdle, and his unstrung bow in his hand, his face smiling and kind again, but maybe a thought sad. "Well," quoth I, "what is the tale for the ballad-maker?" "As Jack Straw said it would be," said he, "the end of the day and the end of the fray." And he pointed to the brave show of the sky over the sunken sun. The knights fled, and the sheriff dead, 2 of the lawyer kind slain afield, and 1 hanged, and cruel was he to make them cruel, and 3 bailiffs knocked on the head, stout men, and so witless, that none found their brains in their skulls, and 5 arbalestiers and 1 archer slain, and 1.5 of others, mostly men come back from the French wars, men of the companions there, knowing no other craft than fighting for gold. And this is the end they are paid for. Well, brother, saving the lawyers who belike had no souls, but only parchment deeds and libels of the same, God rest their souls. He fell a-musing, but I said, "And of our fellowship were any slain?" 2 good men of the township, he said, Hob Horner and Antony Weber, were slain outright, Hob with a shaft, and Antony in the hand-play, and John Pargetter hurt very sore on the shoulder with a glaive, and 5 more men of the fellowship slain in the hand-play, and some few hurt, but not sorely. And as to those slain, if God give their souls rest, it is well, for little rest they had on the earth belike, but for me, I desire rest no more. I looked at him, and our eyes met with no little love, and I wondered to see how wrath and grief within him were contending with the kindness of the man, and how clear the tokens of it were in his face. "Come now, old lad," said he, "for I deem that John Ball and Jack Straw have a word to say to us at the cross yet, since these men broke off the telling of the tale. There shall we know what we are to take in hand tomorrow, and afterwards thou shalt eat and drink in my house this once, if never again." So we went through the orchard closes again, and others were about and anigh us, all turned towards the cross as we went over the dewy grass, whereon the moon was just beginning to throw shadows. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7. More words at the cross. I got into my old place again on the steps of the cross, Will Green beside me, and above me John Ball and Jack Straw again. The moon was halfway up the heavens now, and the short summer night had begun, calm and fragrant, with just so much noise outside our quiet circle as made one feel the world alive and happy. We waited silently until we had heard John Ball and the story of what was to do, and presently he began to speak. "Good people, it is begun but not ended. Which of you is hardy enough to wend the road to London tomorrow?" All, they shouted. "Yea," said he, "even so I deemed of you. Yet forsooth, hearken. London is a great and grievous city, and mayhappen when ye come thither, it shall seem to you over great to deal with, when ye remember the little townships and the cots ye came from. Moreover, when ye dwell here in Kent, ye think forsooth of your brethren in Essex or Suffolk, and there belike an end. But from London ye may have an inkling of all the world, and overburdensome maybe shall that seem to you, a few and a feeble people. Nevertheless I say to you, remember the fellowship, in the hope of which ye have this day conquered, and when ye come to London be wise and wary, and that is as much as to say, be bold and hardy. For in these days are ye building a house which shall not be overthrown, and the world shall not be too great or too little to hold it, for indeed it shall be the world itself, set free from evildoers for friends to dwell in. He ceased awhile, but they hearkened still, as if something more was coming. Then he said, "Tomorrow we shall take the road for Rochester, and most like it were well to see what Sir John Newton in the castle may say to us. For the man is no ill man, and hath a tongue well shapen for words, and it were well that we had him out of the castle and away with us, and that we put a word in his mouth to say to the king. And wot ye well, good fellows, that by then we come to Rochester we shall be a goodly company, and ere we come to Blackheath a very great company, and at London Bridge who shall stay our host? Therefore there is naught that can undo us except our own selves and our hearkening to soft words from those who would slay us. They shall bid us go home and abide peacefully with our wives and children, while they, the lords and counsellors and lawyers, imagine counsel and remedy for us. And even so shall our own folly bid us. And if we hearken thereto, we are undone indeed, for they shall fall upon our peace with war, and our wives and children they shall take from us, and some of us they shall hang, and some they shall scourge, and the others shall be their yoke beasts, yea, and worse, for they shall lack meat more. To fools hearken not, whether they be yourselves or your foemen, for either shall lead you astray. With the lords parley not, for ye know already what they would say to you, and that is, Churl, let me bridle thee and saddle thee, and eat thy livelihood that thou winnest, and call thee hard names because I eat thee up. And for thee, speak not and do not, save as I bid thee. All that is the end of their parleying. Therefore be ye bold, and again bold, and thrice bold. Grip the bow, handle the staff, draw the sword, and set on in the name of the fellowship." He ended amid loud shouts, but straightway answering shouts were heard, and a great noise of the winding of horns, and I misdoubted a new onslaught. And some of those in the throng began to string their bows and handle their bills, but Will Green pulled me by the sleeve and said, "Friends are these by the winding of their horns. Thou art quit for this night, old lad." And then Jack Straw cried out from the cross, "Fair and softly, my masters. These be men of our fellowship, and are for your guests this night. They are from the bents this side of Medway, and are with us here because of the pilgrimage road, and that is the best in these parts, and so the shortest to Rochester. And doubt ye nothing of our being taken unawares this night, for I have bidden and sent out watchers of the ways, and neither a man's son nor a mare's son may come in on us without espial. Now make we our friends welcome. Forsooth, I looked for them an hour later, and had they come an hour earlier yet, some heads would now lie on the cold grass which shall lie on a feather bed tonight, but let be, since all is well. Now get we home to our houses, and eat and drink and slumber this night, if never once again, amid the multitude of friends and fellows, and yet soberly and without riot, since so much work is to hand. Moreover, the priest saith, Bear ye the dead men, both friends and foes, into the chancel of the church, and there this night he will wake them, but after tomorrow let the dead abide to bury their dead. Therewith he leapt down from the cross, and Will and I bestirred ourselves and mingled with the newcomers. They were some 300 strong, clad and armed in all ways like the people of our township, except some half-dozen whose armour shone cold like ice under the moonbeams. Will Green soon had a dozen of them by the sleeve to come home with him to board and bed, and then I lost him for some minutes, and turning about saw John Ball standing behind me, looking pensively on all the stir and merry humours of the joyous uplanders. "Brother from Essex," said he, "shall I see thee again tonight? I were fain of speech with thee, for thou seemest like one that has seen more than most." "Yea," said I, "if ye come to Will Green's house, for thither am I bidden." "Thither shall I come," said he, smiling kindly, "or no man I know in field. Lo, you, Will Green, looking for something, and that is me. But in this house will be song and the talk of many friends, and forsooth I have words in me that crave to come out in a quiet place where they may have each one his own answer. If thou art not afraid of dead men who were alive and wicked this morning, come thou to the church when supper is done, and there we may talk all we will." Will Green was standing beside us before he had done, with his hand laid on the priest's shoulder, waiting till he had spoken out, and as I nodded yea to John Ball, he said, "Now, master priest, thou hast spoken enough this 2 or 3 hours, and this my new brother must tell and talk in my house, and there my maid will hear his wisdom which lay still under the hedge e'en now when the bolts were abroad. So come ye, and ye good fellows, come." So we turned away together into the little street, but while John Ball had been speaking to me I felt strangely, as though I had more things to say than the words I knew could make clear. as if I wanted to get from other people a new set of words. Moreover, as we passed up the street again, I was once again smitten with the great beauty of the scene, the houses, the church with its new chancel and tower, snow white in the moonbeams now, the dresses and arms of the people, men and women, for the latter were now mixed up with the men, their grave sonorous language, and the quaint and measured forms of speech, were again become a wonder to me and affected me almost to tears. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Supper at Will Green's. I walked along with the others, musing as if I did not belong to them, till we came to Will Green's house. He was one of the wealthier of the yeomen, and his house was one of those I told you of, the lower story of which was built of stone. It had not been built long, and was very trim and neat. The fit of wonder had worn off me again by then I reached it, or perhaps I should give you a closer description of it, for it was a handsome yeoman's dwelling of that day, which is as much as saying it was very beautiful. The house on the other side of it, the last house in the village, was old or even ancient, all built of stone, and except for a newer piece built onto it, a hall, it seemed, had round arches, some of them handsomely carved. I knew that this was the parson's house, but he was another sort of priest than John Ball, and what for fear, what for hatred, had gone back to his monastery with the 2 other chantry priests who dwelt in that house, so that the men of the township, and more especially the women, were thinking gladly how John Ball should say mass in their new chancel on the morrow. Will Green's daughter was waiting for him at the door, and gave him a close and eager hug, and had a kiss to spare for each of us withal. A strong girl she was, as I have said, and sweet and wholesome also. She made merry with her father, yet it was easy to see that her heart was in her mouth all along. There was a younger girl, some 12 summers old, and a lad of 10, who were easily to be known for his children, an old woman also who had her livelihood there, and helped the household, and moreover 3 long young men, who came into the house after we had sat down, to whom Will nodded kindly. They were brisk lads and smart, but had been afield after the beasts that evening and had not seen the fray. The room we came into was indeed the house, for there was nothing but it on the ground floor, but a stair in the corner went up to the chamber or loft above. It was much like the room at the Rose, but bigger, the cupboard better wrought, and with more vessels on it, and handsomer. Also the walls, instead of being panelled, were hung with a coarse, loosely woven stuff of green worsted, with birds and trees woven into it. There were flowers in plenty stuck about the room, mostly of the yellow blossoming flag, or flower de luce, of which I had seen plenty in all the ditches, but in the window near the door was a pot full of those same white poppies I had seen when I first woke up, and the table was all set forth with meat and drink, a big salt cellar of pewter in the middle, covered with a white cloth. We sat down, the priest blessed the meat in the name of the Trinity, and we crossed ourselves and fell to. The victual was plentiful of broth and flesh meat, and bread and cherries, so we ate and drank, and talked lightly together when we were full. Yet was not the feast so gay as might have been. Will Green had me to sit next to him, and on the other side sat John Ball, but the priest had grown somewhat distraught, and sat as one thinking of somewhat that was like to escape his thought. Will Green looked at his daughter from time to time, and whiles his eyes glanced round the fair chamber as one who loved it, and his kind face grew sad, yet never sullen. When the herdsmen came into the hall they fell straightway to asking questions concerning those of the fellowship who had been slain in the fray, and of their wives and children, so that for a while thereafter no man cared to jest, for they were a neighbourly and kind folk, and were sorry both for the dead and also for the living that should suffer from that day's work. So then we sat silent a while. The unseen moon was bright over the roof of the house, so that outside all was gleaming bright, save the black shadows, though the moon came not into the room, and the white wall of the tower was the whitest and the brightest thing we could see. Wide open were the windows, and the scents of the fragrant night floated in upon us, and the sounds of the men at their meat, or making merry about the township, and whiles we heard the gibber of an owl from the trees westward of the church, and the sharp cry of a blackbird made fearful by the prowling stoat, or the far-off lowing of a cow from the upland pastures, or the hoofs of a horse trotting on the pilgrimage road, and one of our watchers would that be. Thus we sat a while, and once again came that feeling over me of wonder and pleasure at the strange and beautiful sights, mingled with the sights and sounds and scents beautiful indeed, yet not strange, but rather long familiar to me. But now Will Green started in his seat where he sat with his daughter, hanging over his chair, her hand amidst his thick black curls, and she weeping softly, I thought, and his rough, strong voice broke the silence. "Why, lads and neighbours, what ails us? If the knights who fled from us this eve were to creep back hither and look in at the window, they would deem that they had slain us after all, and that we were but the ghosts of the men who fought them. Yet, forsooth, fair it is at whiles to sit with friends and let the summer night speak for us and tell us its tales. But now, sweetling, fetch the mazer and the wine." "Forsooth," said John Ball, "if ye laugh not overmuch now, ye shall laugh the more on the morrow of tomorrow, as ye draw nearer to the play of point and edge." "That is sooth," said one of the upland guests. "So it was seen in France when we fought there, and the eve of fight was sober, and the morn was merry." "Yea," said another, "but there forsooth it was for nothing ye fought, and tomorrow it shall be for a fair reward." "It was for life we fought," said the first. "Yea," said the second, "for life, and leave to go home and find the lawyers at their fell game. Ho, Will Green, call a health over the cup." For now Will Green had a bowl of wine in his hand. He stood up and said, "Here now I call a health to the rights of Kent, who be turning our ploughshares into swords and our pruning hooks into spears. Drink around, my masters." Then he drank, and his daughter filled the bowl brimming again, and he passed it to me. As I took it I saw that it was of light polished wood, curiously speckled, with a band of silver round it, on which was cut the legend, "In the name of Trinity, fill the cup and drink to me." And before I drank it came upon me to say, "Tomorrow, and the fair days afterwards." Then I drank a great draught of the strong red wine, and passed it on, and every man said something over it, as "The road to London Bridge," "Hob Carter and his mate," and so on, till last of all John Ball drank, saying, "10 years hence, and the freedom of the fellowship." Then he said to Will Green, "Now, Will, must I needs depart to go and wake the dead, both friend and foe, in the church yonder. And whoso of you will be shriven, let him come to me thither in the morn, nor spare for as little after sunrise as it may be. And this our friend and brother from over the water of Thames, he hath will to talk to me, and I with him. So now will I take him by the hand. And so God keep you, fellows." I rose to meet him as he came round the head of the table, and took his hand. Will Green turned round to me and said, "Thou wilt come back again timely, old lad, for betimes on the morrow must we rise, if we shall dine at Rochester." I stammered as I yea said him, for John Ball was looking strangely at me with a half smile, and my heart beat anxiously and fearfully, but we went quietly to the door, and so out into the bright moonlight. I lingered a little when we had passed the threshold, and looked back at the yellow-lighted window and the shapes of the men that I saw therein, with a grief and longing that I could not give myself a reason for, since I was to come back so soon. John Ball did not press me to move forward, but held up his hand as if to bid me hearken. The folk and guests there had already shaken themselves down since our departure, and were gotten to be reasonably merry, it seemed, for one of the guests, he who had spoken of France before, had fallen to singing a ballad of the war to a wild and melancholy tune. I remember the first rhymes of it, which I heard as I turned away my head, and we moved on toward the church. On a fair field of France we fought on a morning so lovely as it lieth along by the water. There was many a lord there, mowed men in the medley, midst the banners of the barons, and bold men of the knighthood, and spearmen and sergeants, and shooters of the shaft. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9. Betwixt the living and the dead. We entered the church through the south porch, under a round arched door, carved very richly, and with a sculpture over the doorway, and under the arch, which as far as I could see by the moonlight, figured St. Michael and the dragon. As I came into the rich gloom of the nave, I noticed for the first time that I had one of those white poppies in my hand. I must have taken it out of the pot by the window as I passed out of Will Green's house. The nave was not very large, but it looked spacious too. It was somewhat old, but well built and handsome, the roof of curved wooden rafters with great tie-beams going from wall to wall. There was no light in it but that of the moon streaming through the windows, which were by no means large, and were glazed with white fretwork, with here and there a little figure in very deep rich colours. 2 larger windows near the east end of each aisle had just been made, so that the church grew lighter toward the east, and I could see all the work on the great screen between the nave and chancel, which glittered bright in new paint and gilding. A candle glimmered in the loft above it, before the huge rood that filled up the whole space between the loft and the chancel arch. There was an altar at the east end of each aisle, the one on the south side standing against the outside wall, the one on the north against a traceried, gaily painted screen. for that aisle ran on along the chancel. There were a few oak benches near this second altar, seemingly just made, and well carved and moulded. Otherwise the floor of the nave, which was paved with a quaint pavement of glazed tiles like the crocks I had seen outside as to wear, was quite clear, and the shafts of the arches rose out of it, white and beautiful under the moon, as though out of a sea, dark but with gleams struck over it. The priest let me linger and look around, when he had crossed himself and given me the holy water, and then I saw that the walls were figured all over with stories, a huge St. Christopher with his black beard looking like Will Green, being close to the porch by which we entered, and above the chancel arch the doom of the last day, in which the painter had not spared either kings or bishops, and in which a lawyer with his blue coif was one of the chief figures in the group which the devil was hauling off to hell. "Yea," said John Ball, "'tis a goodly church and fair, as you may see, twixt Canterbury and London as for its kind. And yet do I misdoubt me where those who are dead are housed, and where those shall house them after they are dead, who built this house for God to dwell in. God grant they be cleansed at last. Forsooth one of them who is now alive is a foul swine and a cruel wolf. Art thou all so sure, scholar, that all such have souls? And if it be so, was it well done of God to make them? I speak to thee thus, for I think thou art no delator, and if thou be, why should I heed it, since I think not to come back from this journey?" I looked at him, and as it were, had some ado to answer him, but I said at last, "Friend, I never saw a soul save in the body, I cannot tell." He crossed himself and said, "Yet do I intend that ere many days are gone by, my soul shall be in bliss among the fellowship of the saints, and merry shall it be, even before my body rises from the dead, for wisely I have wrought in the world, and I wot well of friends that are long ago gone from the world, as Saint Martin, and Saint Francis, and Saint Thomas of Canterbury, who shall speak well of me to the heavenly fellowship, and I shall in no wise lose my reward." I looked shyly at him as he spoke. His face looked sweet and calm and happy, and I would have said no word to grieve him, and yet belike my eyes looked wonder on him. He seemed to note it, and his face grew puzzled. "How deemest thou of these things?" said he. "Why do men die else, if it be otherwise than this?" I smiled. "Why then do they live?" said I. Even in the white moonlight I saw his face flush, and he cried out in a great voice, "To do great deeds, or to repent them that they ever were born." "Yea," said I, "they live to live, because the world liveth." He stretched out his hand to me and grasped mine, but said no more, and went on till we came to the door in the rood screen. Then he turned to me with his hand on the ring latch and said, "Hast thou seen many dead men?" "Nay, but few," said I. "And I a many," said he. "But come now and look on these, our friends first, and then our foes, so that ye may not look to see them, while we sit and talk of the days that are to be on the earth before the day of doom cometh." So he opened the door, and we went into the chancel. A light burned on the high altar before the host, and looked red and strange in the moonlight that came through the wide traceried windows, unstained by the pictures and beflowerings of the glazing. There were new stalls for the priests and vicars where we entered, carved more abundantly and beautifully than any of the woodwork I had yet seen, and everywhere was rich and fair colour, and delicate and dainty form. Our dead lay just before the high altar on low biers, their faces all covered with linen cloths, for some of them had been sore smitten and hacked in the fray. We went up to them, and John Ball took the cloth from the face of one. He had been shot to the heart with a shaft, and his face was calm and smooth. He had been a young man, fair and comely, with hair flaxen almost to whiteness. He lay there in his clothes as he had fallen, the hands crossed over his breast and holding a rush cross. His bow lay on one side of him, his quiver of shafts and his sword on the other. John Ball spake to me while he held the corner of the sheet. "What sayest thou, scholar? Feelest thou sorrow of heart when thou lookest on this, either for the man himself, or for thyself and the time when thou shalt be as he is?" I said, "Nay, I feel no sorrow for this, for the man is not here. This is an empty house, and the master has gone from it. Forsooth, this to me is but as a waxen image of a man. Nay, not even that, for if it were an image, it would be an image of the man as he was when he was alive. But here is no life nor semblance of life, and I am not moved by it. Nay, I am more moved by the man's clothes and war gear. There is more life in them than in him." "Thou sayest sooth," said he, "but sorrowest thou not for thine own death when thou lookest on him?" I said, "And how can I sorrow for that which I cannot so much as think of? Bethink thee that while I am alive I cannot think that I shall die, or believe in death at all, although I know well that I shall die. I can but think of myself as living in some new way." Again he looked on me as if puzzled. Then his face cleared as he said, "Yea, forsooth, and that is what the Church meaneth by death, and even that I look for, and that hereafter I shall see all the deeds that I have done in the body, and what they really were, and what shall come of them. And ever shall I be a member of the Church, and that is the fellowship, then even as now." I sighed as he spoke, then I said, "Yea, somewhat in this fashion have most of men thought, since no man that is can conceive of not being. And I mind me that in those stories of the old Danes their common word for a man dying is to say, he changed his life. And so deemest thou?" I shook my head and said nothing. "What hast thou to say hereon?" said he. "For there seemeth something betwixt us twain, as it were a wall that parteth us." "This," said I, "that though I die and end, yet mankind yet liveth, therefore I end not, since I am a man. And even so thou deemest, good friend, or at the least even so thou doest, since now thou art ready to die in grief and torment rather than be unfaithful to the fellowship, yea, rather than fail to work thine utmost for it. Whereas, as thou thyself saidst at the cross, with a few words spoken and a little huddling up of the truth, with a few pennies paid, and a few masses sung, thou mightest have had a good place on this earth and in that heaven. And as thou doest, so now doth many a poor man unnamed and unknown, and shall do while the world lasteth. And they that do less than this fail because of fear, and are ashamed of their cowardice, and make many tales to themselves to deceive themselves, lest they should grow too much ashamed to live. And trust me, if this were not so, the world would not live but would die, smothered by its own stink. Is the wall betwixt us gone, friend?" He smiled as he looked at me, kindly, but sadly and shamefast, and shook his head. Then in a while he said, "Now ye have seen the images of those who were our friends, come and see the images of those who were once our foes." So he led the way through the side screen into the chancel aisle, and there on the pavement lay the bodies of the foemen, their weapons taken from them, and they stripped of their armour, but not otherwise of their clothes, and their faces mostly, but not all, covered. At the east end of the aisle was another altar, covered with a rich cloth, beautifully figured, and on the wall over it was a deal of tabernacle work, in the midmost niche of it an image painted and gilt of a gay knight on horseback, cutting his own cloak in two with his sword, to give a cantle of it to a half-naked beggar. "Knowest thou any of these men?" said I. He said, "Some I should know, could I see their faces, but let them be." "Were they evil men?" said I. "Yea," he said, "some 2 or 3. But I will not tell thee of them. Let Saint Martin, whose house this is, tell their story, if he will. As for the rest, they were hapless fools, or else men who must earn their bread somehow, and were driven to this bad way of earning it. God rest their souls. I will be no tale-bearer, not even to God." So we stood musing a little while, I gazing not on the dead men, but on the strange pictures on the wall, which were richer and deeper coloured than those in the nave, till at last John Ball turned to me and laid his hand on my shoulder. I started and said, "Yea, brother, now must I get me back to Will Green's house, as I promised to do so timely." "Not yet, brother," said he. "I have still much to say to thee, and the night is yet young. Go we and sit in the stalls of the vicars, and let us ask and answer on matters concerning the fashion of this world of menfolk, and of this land wherein we dwell. For once more I deem of thee that thou hast seen things which I have not seen, and could not have seen." With that word he led me back into the chancel, and we sat down side by side in the stalls at the west end of it, facing the high altar and the great east window. By this time the chancel was getting dimmer as the moon wound round the heavens, but yet was there twilight of the moon, so that I could still see the things about me for all the brightness of the window that faced us. And this moon twilight would last, I knew, until the short summer night should wane, and the twilight of the dawn begin to show us the colours of all things about us. So we sat, and I gathered my thoughts to hear what he would say, and I myself was trying to think what I should ask of him, for I thought of him as he of me, that he had seen things which I could not have seen. End of chapter 9. End of section 2.